Hello, welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm Rob Satloff, the director of the Institute. We are now 5 days into the new Middle East, the horrific era, followed by the barbaric Hamas terrorist attacks in Gaza, against which Israel has already called up hundreds of thousands of soldiers and reserves, poised for a ground operation, actually executing an air operation against Hamas leaders' installations in Gaza. As that is happening, there is rising tension on Israel's northern front. Just overnight, we saw that Israeli aircraft attacked international airports in Damascus and Aleppo, as we have seen in the last few days, rising incremental tensions between Hezbollah, the party of God, the Iran-backed, financed, controlled Lebanese terrorist organization, and Israeli forces on their side of the border. Will there be a second front opened by Hezbollah, opened by Iran, perhaps on the Golan? Will there be a second front to complement what is going on between Hamas and Israel in Gaza? That is the topic of today's session, a dramatically expanded potential for conflict. I'm really pleased that we can have an exceptional panel of my Washington Institute colleagues here in Washington. On my right is our Taube Senior Fellow and Director of our Arab Politics Program, our Rubin Family Arabic Politics Program, David Schenker, former Assistant Secretary of State. On my left is Haneen Ghadar, our Friedman Senior Fellow and expert on Hezbollah, author most recently of Hezbollah Land, a look at Hezbollah within the broader Shiite context in Lebanon. And at the far end of the table, Dr. Farzin Nadimi, Washington Institute Senior Fellow, and really one of, I believe, Washington's most finest experts on Iranian military activity, which is such an important factor when we think about the expansion of potential conflict on the northern front. And joining us from Israel, I'm especially pleased to welcome IDF Major General Yair Golan, Reserve General, now back in uniform. Yair Golan, former Deputy Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, former commander of Israel's Northern Command, facing the confrontation from Hezbollah. Yair Golan is with us live. He's traveling in a car in Israel, and I'm really delighted that he could be with us to give us an on-the-ground sense of what is going on this front, what Israeli strategy may be, and what the potential is for the expansion of conflict in that arena. So first, we're going to go to Major General Golan, and then I'll turn to my colleagues here in Washington. Yair, welcome. The floor is yours.
Welcome, everybody, and hello, Haneen. Good to see you, meet you again. I would say the following. It's really hard to predict what will be the future actions of Hezbollah, Iran, and, all kind of militias in Syria and Iraq. But I can tell you one thing. The decision will be made in Tehran, not in Beirut. The Iranians do understand that a major conflict with Israel, even during a war in the south, is a serious issue. And therefore, they have no intention to endanger their project in Lebanon without their own direct instructions. So I don't see Hassan Nasrallah taking this decision alone. So this is the first issue. The second issue, I think that the decision is not necessarily being made because they look at the situation. They have their own daily situational assessment, and probably they didn't decide yet. They look at the situation, they look at the level of preparedness of the IDF, they look at the challenge, the military challenge they are going to face, and I think that they have exactly like us, the daily assessment process, and therefore the level of preparedness along the northern border is really, really crucial. Really, really crucial from Israeli perspective. So I would say that the fact that we have right now another American air carrier in the Mediterranean, and the fact that we are well prepared along the northern border is extremely, those issues are extremely influential concerning the future Iranian decision. That's what I have to say.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Yair, for those remarks. As long as you can stick with us, stay with us. I understand if you have other pressing matters, because after my other colleagues talk, we'll do back and forth. I want to turn now thank you very much. I want to turn now to my colleague Haneen for the view from the other side of the border. What do we know from the Lebanese side of the border?
Hi, thank you very much, Rob. I'm happy to talk about the thin line that Hezbollah is walking today along the Lebanon-Israel border. There are many indications that they are ready, that they have evacuated most of their officials' family, the people along the border. It's obvious that they are worried about that part of Lebanon. They have been evacuating people along the border, but not further, like not in Dahi, not in the southern suburbs. They haven't called the reserves. There are some indications that they are ready, but there aren't very clear indications that they are definitely going for a full-scale war against Israel or to join the war. They are today walking a very thin line. Every day we see them pushing the limits a little bit further. Obviously, we will see more and more calculated clashes between Hezbollah and the IDF along the border. However, this might change any minute because this a mass miscalculation, a wrong target, a change in Iran's tactic could throw Hezbollah right into the game, and they are definitely ready for that. They do not want that, but they are ready for that. So far, it's been a calculated engagement with a lot of readiness on the ground in Lebanon, but also on the Golan Heights, where a lot of Hezbollah officials and Radwan forces are leading some Iran militias in the Golan Heights. And we see the front also activated from there. However, Hezbollah and Iran's calculation, and when I say Hezbollah's calculations, I really mean Iran's calculations, because it's definitely this decision, because it's a major decision, it's not made in Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah is a good advisor to Khamenei and the IRGC. He can tell them a lot and advise them about the arena, about what is good and what is bad. But at the end of the day, it's not his decision, it's Iran's decision, as much as the whole thing is Iran's decision. And we've seen this many, many, many times, especially when the joint operation room was established in Lebanon, instead the southern suburbs of Beirut, between Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah, and the other Palestinian factions under the supervision of Iran. And it's not a coincidence that after this joint operation room, we saw the escalation of the united front against Israel from the Golan, from Lebanon, along the border inside Israel. This is a coordinated, definitely a coordinated attack. This is definitely a coordinated operation with some people at the forefront, Hamas today. Tomorrow it could be Hezbollah, depending on what Iran wants. They do not again, so Iran today does not want to lose the threat that Hezbollah poses on Israel. It's a very important threat for them in the region. It's a very important, it's Iran's main military wing in the region. It's the main IRGC military arm in the region, and they do not want to lose that. For a very, very long time, since 2006, and especially when Hezbollah went into the region, the strategy shifted in the sense that the main target is really inside the region. Israel will stay as, an enemy and a target, but for Hezbollah per se, the threat of their weapons is more important than using the weapons themselves. And they do not want to lose the threat of the weapons. So far, it is very obvious that they're trying hard not to lose that edge, which is the threat of the weapons. This is an advantage that if you use it, you lose it. And Iran understands that. The goal of this calculated engagement today is to reap the benefits without losing this edge, the threat, and the Lebanon buildup. Since 2006, although they have been involved in Syria, although they have been involved in the region as a whole, they have been stocking and piling and also producing new weapons, like the precision weapons that they have been talking about for a long time. They will use this if they have to. A full-scale war, however, it means that they will lose this arsenal. Their military force, their fighting force will be weakened, and they will probably fail to achieve the victory, which is the ultimate goal that they've been talking about. They will lose the public support because no one in Lebanon, including their constituency, welcomes a war in Lebanon today. No one wants it because Lebanon is already in shambles and they cannot afford to go for a war. There's no budget for the war. Even if there's some budget for the war, they will have no budget for reconstruction of their constituencies, but also they will have no money for reconstruction of their own arsenal. It will be very hard to restock, and they will lose that edge. And they will lose the Lebanon edge. They do not want to lose the Lebanon edge. They have a strategy inside Lebanon. They're already feeling very isolated in Lebanon. They do not want to lose that. But Iran already has won what it wanted from this war so far. Iran achieved some goals in this. They don't really need Hezbollah to push further. What Iran wanted, in addition, generally regaining its edge against Israel and in the region, and you saw today that it's trying to reap the benefits of everything. It has definitely frozen the Saudi-Israeli deal. This is not today. This is not moving forward, and this is the main thing that Iran wants. In addition to everything that it brings, like the isolation of Iran and its 4 countries, the region was moving forward away from Iran and all the 4 countries it's controlling towards a more, economic progress and everywhere else. So this isolation needed to be broken, and they've done that today. They responded to Israel, a threat that they've been always talking about. They exposed Israeli weakness in terms of intelligence and the military preparedness without really losing Hezbollah, its strongest card. They don't have to go there. For Iran, more Palestinian blood spilled for this is not a bad price to pay. This is for them. Hamas is not the Palestinians, and Iran is never really cared about Lebanese blood or Palestinian blood. It only cares about its interest. Using Hezbollah would really risk that edge. However, I have to say that this might change any minute because things might change. Let's say if the IDF decided to go into a land incursion on Gaza. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But this could change. This could change if Iran feels that it's not really gaining what it wanted to do. Iran's calculations might shift any minute. And the losses now, if they use Hezbollah today, the losses might trump the gains. But at one point, if they feel that using Hezbollah might add to the gains, they will use Hezbollah. Not yet. So, but they do understand that once you use them, you lose them. It depends on how they understand Israel's preparedness to fight on many different fronts. If they feel that they could overwhelm Israel and gain from this, they might go for it. since everything is might change any minute, this is a very vulnerable, risky operation that Hezbollah is leading. They might, every day things might change. So far, these are the calculations, but again, things might change very quickly. And I can talk more later in the Q&A about like what could be done in order to restrain Hezbollah. But this is basically my view of the border until today, again, until now.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Haneen. Very interesting. Similar conclusions from General Golan and Haneen Ghadar, though based on differing sets of factors when you're looking at it from Israel or looking at it through the eyes of Hezbollah and perhaps Iran. I'll turn now to Dave Schenker. Dave, beforehand, I'm sorry. If you want to get into this conversation after our opening remarks, you have two ways. If you're on Zoom, please send your comments through the Zoom bar, the Q&A function. If you're on some other platform, please email me directly at rsatloff, RSATLOFF, @washingtoninstitute.org. Dave Schenker.
Thanks, Rob. Since Sunday, we've seen a series of Hezbollah provocations and some very calculated and calibrated Israeli responses in the north. Situation, as the general mentioned and Haneen, is extremely volatile. And like 2006, it's a real danger for miscalculation. Already, we've seen some false alarms that attacks are occurring from the north. It's not difficult to imagine the trajectory shifting toward escalation in the north, especially after the promised Israeli ground operation. I'm reminded of what Admiral Painter, the fictional U.S. carrier group commander played by Fred Thompson in The Hunt for Red October, said. He said, this business will get out of control and we'll be lucky to live through it. So what is Washington doing about this? On Tuesday, during his really extraordinary speech, President Biden mapped out the U.S. response to Hamas's unprecedented attack. In addition to U.S. rhetorical support for Israeli ground operations in Gaza, the president dispatched the USS Gerald Ford carrier strike group to the Eastern Med. During his speech, the president warned, quote unquote, any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of the situation, I have one word: don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear. Now, NSC spokesman John Kirby described the deployment of the carrier group as a deterrent signal to Iran and Hezbollah, as well as other regional Iranian proxies. It's also a response to a significant terrorist operation against Americans, an ongoing hostage situation. Abu Dhabi has apparently also spoken to Damascus, urging Syria not to open a front. It's unclear to me how much of a deterrent the carrier group is to Hezbollah and Iran. Indeed, I watched a lengthy segment on Al-Manar, Hezbollah's television station, yesterday, in which analysts suggested that the deployment of the carrier group was a signal of Israel's weakness in the aftermath of the October 7th attack. But the group brings other capabilities. In the event that the conflict widens, these ships can augment and enhance Israel's radar picture, improving its ability to contend with incoming long-range missiles. U.S. assets can also provide Israel with ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It was 50 years ago tomorrow, October 13th, that the Nixon administration initiated its own air supply operation to Israel, known as Nickel Grass, following the onset of the October 6th war. And that operation lasted 32 days. The administration has already delivered its first tranche of the ammunition resupply to Israel. The first planes departed the U.S. on 9 October. Washington is committed to replenishing Israel's supply of Iron Dome receptors, which will be especially important should the conflict broaden. Beyond this, just yesterday, Washington announced it was sending a second carrier strike group, the USS Eisenhower to the region. The group's deployment from Norfolk to the Sixth Fleet was already scheduled, but this will lend further weight, if required, to the intended message to Iran and its proxies. As I said earlier, it's difficult at this point to imagine the U.S. will conduct kinetic operations against Israel's adversaries. To the best of my knowledge, the last time the U.S. engaged in Lebanon was 1983, when U.S. Navy ships fired more than 300 shells into the Shuf Mountains to support Lebanese army operations. The last time the U.S. engaged militarily in Syria was 2018, when the Trump administration lost 59 Tomahawk missiles after Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against regime opponents. In normal times, Israel doesn't require or want U.S. operational assistance like this. But if this turns into a two-front war or broadens in other ways, it won't be normal times. Now, Iran and its proxies appear to have some concerns about U.S. involvement. Already, several of these groups have warned the United States. Hezbollah spokesman warned on October 9th, if the U.S. intervenes directly, all positions in the region will be, all U.S. positions in the region will become legitimate targets and face attacks. And on that day, quote unquote, there will be no red line. Of course, Hezbollah is already reportedly making preparations to target U.S. troops in Syria, and they've killed hundreds of Americans in the past. So there's nothing especially new here. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut may want to upgrade its warning to American citizens, not just to stay away from the southern border and exercise vigilance, but to leave Lebanon, lest they be kidnapped, like more than a dozen other Americans were by Hamas. The Houthis in Yemen have also warned about U.S. intervention. I believe it was Abdul Malik al-Houthi who said his group would respond to any U.S. intervention in Gaza with drones, missiles, and other military options. He said the group was ready to coordinate intervention with other members of the Axis of Resistance, which encompasses Iranian Shiite-backed militia factions in Iraq as well as Lebanon. In Iraq, we've seen Taube Hezbollah. I think General Yaron had referred to this. We've seen Taube Hezbollah of the Hashd Shabi are also threatened the United States. Hadi al-Amri of the Badr organization, and so on. All of these folks either have a history of targeting Americans or U.S. allies, so there's nothing new here. But I think it raises and sort of emphasizes the potential for this broadening.
Okay, thank you very much. Opening up the at least the potential of direct American engagement in what possibly could happen with an expansion, an escalation into a second front. So we just heard Dave talk about American forces beefing up in the region. I want to turn to you, Farzin, to talk about Iran, the IRGC, and their capabilities and intentions in this region.
Thank you, Rob, and Major General Golan, my esteemed colleagues.
Pull the mic a little closer.
Well, Iran has supervised development of Hezbollah to an almost peer-level military ally in the region, and these proxy forces, including and most prominently the Hezbollah, have been a very important aspect of Iran's strategy in the region. However, Iran has also developed its conventional forces in the region for the purpose of deterring and any possible quote-unquote aggression from their enemies, including especially the United States. But so far, Iran has exercised purely a defensive posture. And after all, this is what proxies are usually for. Hezbollah is one of the key nuts in Iran's deterrence strategy machine. It's very important for Iran, and almost no doubt Iran will watch any military movement around the Lebanese borders. We know that Hezbollah has been well supplied by Iran. Iran has, as I mentioned, supervised the development of Hezbollah's arsenal of weapons and later military industry and workshops for quite many years. So the capabilities of Hezbollah to pose a direct challenge to any deployment of U.S. Navy assets to the Eastern Mediterranean is obvious. And in the 2006 war, Hezbollah used an Iranian-supplied C-802 missile to damage a U.S. missile corvette, Israeli missile corvette Hanit. And we can assume that Hezbollah has almost doubled the range of its anti-ship missiles since then. And there should be this, I'm sure it is in the mind of the U.S. planners that they need to maintain a cautious perimeter around the Lebanese borders and coastlines, and that is the case in the Gulf region as well. The Iranians have been conducting some naval exercises, very limited in nature, and that's also points to their defensive posture. They have used some rhetorics against the U.S. Any U.S. direct support for the Israel operations against Hamas, but so far they haven't gone that much further. And we know about the famous comments by the supreme leader of the Iranian regime. So I believe Iranians have understood the gravity of the situation, and considering the so far calculated Hezbollah provocations, I believe that will continue to be the case, even if there is a ground invasion into Gaza Strip, unless there is a chance of a total overwhelming of Hamas and PIJ forces in Gaza. I don't think that there will be any direct military threat from either Hezbollah or Iran. But we also have to keep watch on a possibility that Iran will use plausible deniability, special naval operations. Almost no doubt they will use the drones against Hezbollah's against Israeli shipping. But no doubt the most important capability of Hezbollah is extensive missile arsenal. I think a good point of reference should be the recent Yemeni Houthi military parade and how they displayed an impressive arsenal of Fateh 110 derivatives, including some anti-ship versions with precision guidance capabilities. So we have to assume that Hezbollah does have these capabilities, but that can cover the entire Israel and also cover a good range within the Eastern Mediterranean. However, as I mentioned, so far they have been defensive. I assume they will remain so. What we need to keep watch on is any movement of Iranian air defense assets into Lebanon using Syria. But Israeli air forces and IDF has been doing a great job in recent years of preventing Iran from sending air defense assets into Lebanon. That would be a threat if the Hezbollah could boost its air defense capabilities. So far, we haven't seen any indication toward that. So Iran will redouble its efforts to send more weapons and ammunition to Hezbollah through Syria. And I'm sure we will see more Israeli air action against those supply routes. Whether Iran will try other means of doing that, I doubt so, because the maritime route will pose even more danger, and those ships will be even more vulnerable to drone attacks, and in that case, we could see some escalations in the maritime arena. But other than that, I see very little chance of any direct threat posed against any U.S. military assets in the region, except using Iranian proxy. Or some Iraqi militia groups in Iraq might attempt sending drones into military outposts manned by U.S. forces in Syria or Iraq, but not much more than.
All right, thank you very much, Farzin. So let me open this session by asking a bit of a counterintuitive question. The collective wisdom here is that the initiative belongs to Tehran. Of course, General Golan, Israel just underwent this sort of mind-bending, horrific experience where this enormous, incomprehensible number of civilians were killed. One would imagine that Israel is not going to wait for the prospect of receiving a massive volley of Iranian missiles and rockets that would leave large numbers of Israelis killed elsewhere in the country. What, in your view, would be the trigger, if any, for Israeli preemption against Hezbollah? Yair.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, from this situation, current situation, we can think about, few scenarios. And the first scenario I would like to mention is that, Israel is in some sort of large maneuver inside the Gaza Strip, and the Hezbollah exploit this situation in order to attack Israel. This is one scenario. The second scenario is that Israel launch a preemptive strike on Hezbollah, assuming that Hezbollah has, or Iran has the intention to attack Israel. So another scenario. Third scenario is a direct Iranian involvement, using its direct capabilities from Iranian soil, ballistic missiles and the cruise missiles, and also capabilities that located in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, and of course in Lebanon. So I would say that we have, different scenarios that in a way will shape the extent and the form of involvement of the USA. So I think that the real challenge right now for decision makers is to look for all the possible scenarios and to define what will be the right response to each scenario, and whether or whether not it's wise to launch some sort of preemptive attack on possible enemy entity in the region. Concerning that, from Israeli perspective, the level of coordination between Israel and the US is extremely important. So if you ask me, as Prime Minister or Minister of Defense, hard in order to be the same line with the Pentagon and with the White House. And that, in a way, expose the weakness of Israel today, because the tension between the White House and Jerusalem is pretty in a high level in the last, I would say, 10 months. this period, the period of change in Israel, inside Israel, and also concerning the foreign policy of Israel. So I would say, I can guess that we are going to see major changes in the Israeli politics, in the Israeli system, because of this. And hopefully, we will see something much more positive and much more in line with the U.S. concerning our mutual challenges from Iran.
All right, very good. Thank you, Yair. Again, if you want to get into this conversation, use the Q&A function of the Zoom bar or send me an email at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org. Haneen, I have a question for you about the Lebanese armed forces. The LAF, supported by the United States and others, do they have a role to play in all this? Is it positive? Is it constructive? Or is it not?
That's a very good question. So far, the Lebanese forces have been sitting this one out, but passively sitting this one out, in the sense that, in general, throughout all the Hezbollah-Israel war, they really don't get involved except in very small, limited incidents. So they consider that this is not their war. They stay away from it, especially now that their readiness for any involvement is not really good because of the financial crisis that is hitting all Lebanon's institutions. And despite the U.S. support for the army, most of their fighters and especially the soldiers, they're not really doing anything. Most of them are busy trying to get food on the table. I'm saying passively involved because there hasn't been really any strong statement from the Lebanese state in general, but also from the army, which is much more involved than any other state institutions, in the sense is that really this is not the time for Hezbollah to drag Lebanon into war. They're sitting this out in the sense that they're not involved, but they're also not saying anything to send a clear message to Hezbollah that the army is against it. And I think Lebanon state institutions in general, the government, but specifically the security institutions, the army especially, needs to have a much clearer stance on the risk and Hezbollah's engagement and what it means for them and for their relationship with them as well.
Dave Schenker, I think most of our viewers know the answer, but it's important to at least ask the question. There is a United Nations interim force in South Lebanon, thousands of international troops. Do they have a role to play at all in preventing conflict between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah?
Rob, sadly, the role of UNIFIL, all 10,500 of them, is to serve as human shields for Hezbollah when the balloon goes up. When I was in government, I tried to change the mandate of UNIFIL. They weren't fulfilling a role that was de-escalating conflict or preventing the rearmament of Hezbollah, the control of broad swaths of territory along the border as military bases. And so I said, and Secretary Pompeo, agreed that we have to change the mandate or downsize the force to what it was before 2006 war, which was about 1,800 people. You recall that we put in 8,000 more to try and prevent the rearmament of Hezbollah. That never worked. And now they're in a very vulnerable place. So periodically they report on rockets. And you'll see, if there's not a war, that there will be a report a couple months from now that documents what Hezbollah did in this war and how Israel responded during the skirmishes. But no, there's no role that UNIFIL can play. It's much like the LAF. They're a passive observer to what's going on.
Farzin, we saw some reports recently of Islamic Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, on not just on the Lebanese territory, but the Syrian Golan. Could you tell us a little bit about what they're doing there, and what the prospect is that perhaps that is a front that heats up or is used by Iran in its in the escalation?
Well, Golan Heights has always been, or at least in the last decade or so, been a favorite front line of the IRGC, especially since their increasing presence in Syria after the civil war, and they have been trying to both recruit local groups into militia outfits that they can supplant Hezbollah forces in Syria and Golan area in case that there need to be any infiltration into Golan Heights. I'm sure they have been planning to do exactly what Hamas did in the Gaza Strip in case of with regard to watching the border, watching the level of control and the communications, and they have been trying to create the ability to jam Israeli communications and blind their eyes and ears in the region if there is going to be a major incursion from the Golan area. And I think they have been deploying some drone capability and rocket capabilities, because exactly for the reason that Golan Heights can not only complement the northern border, the southern Lebanon border with Israel, but also they can also serve as an alternative, a lower risk alternative to the Lebanon arena.
And just to pursue this, are you suggesting that there's even a possibility that the Hamas model we saw on Saturday of land, of multiple ways of attacking could be done through the Golan border against Israeli communities on the Israel side of that border?
We should never dismiss that possibility, because Quds Force has been present in all those regions. They have this central command and control and planning and research and development a capability that tries to integrate and fuse all these intelligence that they have from all fronts. And I'm sure every lesson they learned from this latest operation by Hamas can be implemented in Golan area. And I think that it has been going on for years. I remember back in early 90s when I was sent as a school group to visit Syria. We were taken to the Golan Heights, and we were shown all those Israeli surveillance outposts there, and we were told that they were watching these outposts and all their capabilities, and someday we will overrun them. And that was 1991 or 1989, I guess.
Haneen, one person that we haven't heard from is Hassan Nasrallah.
Yeah.
We have heard from the supreme leader of Iran. We have heard from Khalid Mashal. We've heard from all sorts of Middle Easterners, but we haven't seen or heard a word from the leader of Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Why is that? And is that itself a sort of message?
It's an indication. It's not a message as much as it's an indication, in the sense that last war that Hezbollah was involved in with Israel was 2006, and Hassan Nasrallah was there on air, commenting nonstop, announcing every single operation, sometimes live. That was because they knew what they were doing, and they have decided what they wanted to do, and they had a plan all along. I think today Hassan Nasrallah's absence is not a coincidence. It's an indication for one or two things. One, that they do not want to show that kind of strong involvement, or because they really don't know what they're going to do next. And I think Hezbollah, in a way, is facing this kind of dilemma. They want to be part of the war without really being part of the war. The denial, plausibility of being, like not being involved, but also being involved. Hassan Nasrallah statements, if he wants to talk, he has to be decisive, because this is his charisma. And I think at this point, he cannot really be decisive because they don't want to be very clear about what they're going to do, or maybe they don't know what they're going to do next. They're still waiting for the order to come from Tehran.
Okay, very good. General, if I can come back to you for a minute, if you're still with us. Yair, are you still with us? Yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about the impact of the massive call up, where all these troops are going, what the preparations are, not so much the operational preparations in the south, but what new preparations are made, if any, in anticipation of what could happen toward the north?
Well, I would say that because of this massive surprise attack launched by the Hamas, the level of preparedness right now of the IDF is in the highest peak. So maybe it's not such a good thing for Hassan Nasrallah or for the Iranians. Maybe it's not the best situation for them to launch another attack from the north. I would say that right now we have finished the process of calling up all our reserve units, and the deployment is in the last stages. And I think that right now we are well prepared for any developments in the region. So it's all about waiting and seeing where the Hezbollah and the Iranians are heading. I think it will be wise for them to be aside, but I have no intention to say that I know what will be their decision. So I totally agree with Khalid that yes, we need to wait and see. And my guess that they didn't make up their mind and they didn't make their decisions up to now. As I said before, it's all about their situational assessment, probably twice a day, and we have no ability to be in the mind of Rouhani or any other, prominent figure in Iran or in Lebanon. So yes, we need to wait and see and to be well prepared.
Dave, thank you, Yair. Dave,
Thank you.
I want to just expand this, the aperture for a moment. One can only imagine that America's global adversaries, China, Russia, would salivate at the idea of America getting engaged in another Middle East conflict, which is a separate issue from the wisdom of getting engaged to support Israel. But you can imagine how Beijing and Moscow must see this as an opportunity, draw down American weaponry, less to send to Ukraine, less to send to Taiwan, etc. What do we have to look for? What steps do we have to take to deter any mischief making they may make to try to actually stir the pot in this part of the world and deepen America's involvement?
Well, you point out exactly what I was thinking of when you started asking the question, which is, we are somewhat challenged in our ability to provide all the equipment that Israel will need now and continue providing to Ukraine and keep our own readiness for other challenges, Taiwan, et cetera, and other Chinese encroachments. Listen, I think the main thing is that our posture in the region has to be and has to, maintain its level of readiness. We have to protect ourselves proactively, whether in Iraq or in places like Al Tanaf in Syria. I can imagine that at times like this, regardless of what we're doing with Israel in Gaza, whether we get more and more involved or less, that we have to show that we're going to be really proactive and ferocious, actually, in handling the challenges of these Iranian-backed militia, or even Hezbollah, which I mentioned in my talk, was reportedly planning on attacking U.S. personnel in these areas. But the short answer is yes. Russia, has a certain type of relationship with Hamas. Would love to see the United States get bogged down in another Middle East war. And I think this administration, as with any U.S. administration, will really be hesitant to do so, except in the worst case scenario.
Haneen, when we had our event on the Hamas attacks a couple of days ago, it was important for speakers to point out that Hamas does not equal the people of Gaza. And I think today it's important to point out Hezbollah does not equal the people of Lebanon. So can you just give us a little bit of context, popularity, support, both within the Shiite community and more broadly? Where does Hezbollah fit in the Lebanese political context?
Yes, this is, I think, the main issue going around Lebanon today. There is definitely a support for the Palestinian people. There's something, in Lebanon has always been, and David knows that very well. It's like the Lebanese people who support the Palestinian cause don't really like the Palestinian people. So there's always this drive for, the resistance is always attractive as a concept. But when you see the Palestinian blood or the Lebanese blood spilled because of this conflict, is always a tool for the Iranians to drive more attention and support. So before this incident, Hezbollah was losing popularity across the board, right? And not just across the Lebanese, all the Lebanese sects, but even within the Shia community. And like I discussed this in my book, obviously in details. But Hezbollah recently has put the resistance narrative on hold for so many years and has turned from resistance, quote unquote, to a mafia and militia and a drug cartel. And this has become very clear for the Lebanese, especially after 2019, that Hezbollah is there to protect the status quo, the political elite, the corrupt political elite, and there was no question about their involvement in hindering the investigation in the Beirut port. So they've been losing their edge in Lebanon. For them, being involved from the margins today is a great opportunity for them to regain that resistance narrative. However, no one wants them to drag Lebanon into war. Very few people in Lebanon are ready to die for Iran. No more. 2006 was the divine victory, quote unquote, and that was like the ultimate end. Everybody understood that after that, Lebanon will be safe. No one wants war. No one can afford war. Everyone understands that after this war, there's no one coming to reconstruct and give them money. That's clear. So Hezbollah is walking again this thin line of popularity of that. Playing the game within certain limits could help them regain the resistance narrative, but dragging Lebanon into war might backfire, and they will be blamed if they start it.
All right, very good. I know that General Yair Golan had to leave us. I want to thank him for joining us today. That's going to bring to a close this discussion, this hour focused on the potential for escalation in the northern border of Israel. either against Hezbollah and its forces on the Lebanese side, the IRGC and its assets on the Golan side. I want to thank my colleagues, David Schenker, Hanin Khadar, Farzin Ladimi, and thank you for joining us today here at the Washington Institute.
Thank you.